My name is Beatrice, and the night my family decided I was disposable. They didn't whisper it behind closed doors. They announced it to the world like breaking news. I came home later than usual, my hands still smelling like espresso grounds and disinfectant from my shift at the cafe, my mind half lost in thoughts about a logo redesign. I was struggling to finish for a client who paid too little but expected too much. The street was louder than it should have been for a Tuesday night. Cars were parked wrong. Porch lights were on. Someone was laughing. At first, I thought there was a block party or maybe an argument spilling into the neighborhood. Then I saw my suitcase. It was mine because the zipper was broken the same way it had been since college. And because it was sitting on the curb like it had been waiting to be abandoned. Around it were trash bags, black, shiny, overfilled, split open by careless hands. My clothes were half soaked from a leaking lawn sprinkler. Papers I recognized immediately, bank statements, sketches, old resumes were scattered across the driveway like confetti from a celebration. I hadn't agreed to attend. My mother stood at the center of it all, phone held high, her face perfectly angled toward the screen. Eyes bright in that performative way she reserved for church's selfies and Facebook. Lives. Enough is enough, she said into the camera. Some people just refuse to grow up. I was standing 10 feet away, keys still in my hand, but she didn't look at me, not once. My younger brother hovered near the porch, pretending not to grin as he nudged one of the bags with his foot, while my sister circled the mess with her own phone. Narrating like this was behind the scenes. Footage for a reality show no one had asked for. Someone across the street muttered, "About time," and that hurt more than I expected. I didn't cry. I didn't yell. I didn't defend myself the way I'd rehearsed 100 times in my head. During quieter arguments, I just felt something shut off inside me, like a breaker flipping when the load gets too heavy. I walked past them, knelt on wet concrete, and started picking up what I could salvage. My laptop was damp. My notebook was ruined, but I packed them anyway because even broken things still felt like mine. As I loaded the car, my mother's voice floated over the comments she was reading aloud, nodding as strangers validated a version of me that had never existed. When I drove away, no one followed. They thought they'd erased me. But they didn't know what none of them could see. Yet this wasn't the end of my story. It was the moment it stopped being theirs to control. 6 months before that night on the curb, my life didn't look broken, just unfinished. I had a small studio apartment 25 minutes outside of Phoenix, the kind with thin walls and a bathroom fan that screamed every time you turned it on. But it was mine. I paid rent on time, even when it meant saying no to dinners out. I drove a faded blue Toyota with a cracked dashboard that rattled when I hit the freeway, and I worked full-time as a junior visual designer at a regional marketing firm that specialized in brands most people never noticed but relied on every day. Dental offices, HVAC companies, local grocery chains. It wasn't glamorous, but it was honest work. And when I saw my designs printed on storefront windows or mailers, it gave me a quiet sense of pride. I was building something, even if it wasn't loud. Then the contracts slowed. Then the meetings got shorter. Then one Thursday morning, my supervisor asked me to step into a glass conference room and use the word restructuring, like it was a pillow meant to soften the fall. By the end of the month, my badge didn't open the door anymore. I told myself it was temporary. I applied everywhere. I redesigned my portfolio twice. I cut expenses down to the bone. But rent doesn't wait for optimism, and savings disappear faster than people admit. When my lease ended, my mother offered the basement. For a little while, emphasizing the word, like it was a promise she intended to keep. We agreed on a small monthly payment, plus chores, plus the unspoken understanding that I was on borrowed time. I packed my apartment into boxes and told myself this was a strategic retreat, not a failure. The basement wasn't awful, low ceiling, one narrow window, The smell of old carpet and laundry detergent, but it wasn't freedom. I set up a folding table as a desk, balanced my monitor on storage bins, and spent my days applying for jobs while my family moved freely above me, narrating my presence like I was a cautionary tale. My mother told friends she was helping me get back on my feet. At home, she reminded me how much electricity I used. My brother joked about me playing artist instead of finding real work. My sister filmed everything except me, unless I fit her narrative of struggle just right. Still, I kept going. Late nights, rejections, small freelance gigs that barely paid, but kept my skills sharp. I told myself it was temporary. I believed it, right up until the night they decided I'd overstayed my worth. And maybe that's what hurt the most, not that I was struggling, but that they needed me to stay that way, so their story about me would keep making sense. The email that changed everything arrived on a morning I almost ignored my inbox. I'd been awake since dawn, staring at the cracked ceiling of the basement, listening to my mother move around upstairs like she was pacing a courtroom. My phone buzzed with another rejection from a firm I barely remembered applying to, and for a moment, I considered going back to sleep just to escape the feeling of being stuck in neutral. Then I saw the subject line, following up, remote design role. I sat up so fast. I hit my head on the low beam above my bed and didn't even care. The company was a growing software startup based in Denver. Small enough to move fast, big enough to pay fairly. They'd seen my portfolio, loved my typography work, and wanted to bring me on as a contract designer with a strong chance of long-term work. The rate made my chest tighten, not because it was outrageous, but because it was finally respectful, enough to save, enough to leave. I reread the email 3 times, then printed the contract because I needed to see it on paper to believe it was real. My hands were shaking when I went upstairs. My mother was at the kitchen counter scrolling on her phone, already annoyed about something that had nothing to do with me. "Mom," I said, trying to keep my voice steady, "I think I found something. It's remote. It pays well. This could really help me get out of your way." She looked up, just briefly, eyes flicking from my face to the papers in my hand. "Contract work isn't real security," she said flatly. "People like you always get too excited too fast." Then she went back to scrolling. Conversation over. That sentence, "people like you," stuck to me like static. I laughed it off out loud, but inside something shifted. That night, I heard my sister in the basement while I was showering. She said she was looking for a charger. I told her not to touch my desk. When I came back, the contract was slightly out of place, the pages no longer neatly stacked. I didn't accuse anyone. I didn't make a scene. I just slid the papers into my backpack and slept, with it beside my bed like it was something fragile. 2 days later, my mother announced at dinner that I needed to start thinking about other arrangements. No timeline, no discussion, just pressure. I signed the contract that same night. What I didn't know, what I wouldn't realize until much later, was that my good news hadn't scared her because I was failing. It scared her because I wasn't, and in her world, my independence wasn't something to celebrate. It was something to eliminate before it disrupted the story she'd been telling everyone else. I didn't understand how calculated it all was until I was sitting on my friend Marissa's couch, wrapped in a borrowed hoodie, replaying a screen-recorded video I hadn't known existed until someone sent it to me with the message, "I'm so sorry." The clip showed my mother standing in the driveway, phone raised, voice steady and rehearsed, talking about tough loves and boundaries while my belongings sat in trash bags behind her like props. In the corner of the frame, you could see my laptop case unzipped, papers spilling out. When Marissa paused the video and zoomed in, my stomach dropped. Right on top was the contract, my name, the company logo, the rate, everything she'd told me not to get excited about. "When did she find out about this?" Marissa asked quietly. I thought back to that morning, my sister in the basement. The contract shifted on my desk, the way my mother had suddenly started pushing me out without warning. It wasn't impulsive, it was preventative. They hadn't thrown me out because I was a burden. They'd thrown me out because I was about to stop being one. Marissa disappeared into her bedroom and came back with an old accordion folder. "You should look at this," she said. Inside were copies of documents I vaguely remembered from years ago, after my grandfather died. Back then, my mother had told me it was boring estate stuff and that she'd handle it. I'd been grieving. I'd believed her. The papers told a different story. According to the will, I wasn't just a guest in that house, I was a partial owner, 40% of the home. Majority interest in a small rental property in Colorado, a stake in a family business I'd never been allowed to ask questions about. There was even a handwritten note from my grandfather. Scrawled in the margins, "Beatrice sees patterns. She'll need protection when others pretend not to." My throat tightened. Every comment about me living off my mother, every rent payment I'd handed over, every joke about me being irresponsible at all sat on top of this. Hidden truth like a lie balanced on another lie. When I called the attorney listed on the will, she confirmed everything calmly, professionally, like this kind of betrayal was something she saw every day. "You have rights," she told me, and from what I can see, they hadn't respected them. I hung up and stared at the wall, realizing that the night they'd thrown my life onto the curb wasn't about discipline or disappointment. It was about control. They needed me gone before I found out who I actually was on paper. What they couldn't have predicted was that once I knew, I wouldn't come back begging. I wouldn't go live. I wouldn't scream. I would wait. And I would let the truth do what it does best when it finally gets room to breathe. The next few months were the quietest rebellion of my life. While my family spun narratives online and in group chats I never responded to, I focused on building something they couldn't reach. I moved into a small one-bedroom apartment on the edge of the city, the kind of place with mismatched appliances and a view of a parking lot. But every square foot of it belonged to me. No one commented on how long my showers were. No one counted the lights I left on. I worked from a real desk, sunlight spilling across my keyboard in the mornings, coffee cooling beside me as I designed interfaces and brand kits for clients who knew me only by my work, not by my family's opinion of me. The Denver startup kept their word. One project turned into three. Three turned into a retainer. For the first time in years, I could breathe without calculating how much that breath cost. In the background, the attorney Ms. Alvarez was doing the kind of work that never trends or goes viral, but changes lives all the same. She requested bank statements. She traced rental income. She flagged loans taken out against properties that had my name attached, but not my consent. Every call with her grounded me. She never rushed me, never minimized what had happened. "We move when you're ready," she said more than once. Meanwhile, my phone stayed silent by choice. My mother texted like nothing had happened, photos of church potlucks, reminders about distant relatives' birthdays, casual attempts to stitch normalcy back together without addressing the wound underneath. My brother sent a few half-hearted jokes. My sister posted vague quotes about betrayal and healing that her followers ate up without context. I watched it all from a distance, filing screenshots into a folder labeled records, not because I wanted revenge, but because I finally understood something my grandfather had tried to teach me. Documentation is power. When Ms. Alvarez called one Tuesday afternoon and said, "I think we're ready," my hands didn't shake the way they used to. She laid it out plainly. Years of rental income that should have been shared, debt secured against jointly owned property without disclosure, a clause in the will about concealed ownership. That carried real consequences if a judge decided to enforce it. "This doesn't have to be a war," she said, "but it does have to be honest." We sent the letters formal, calm, impossible to ignore. For a few days, nothing happened. I went to the gym. I answered client email. I bought a new plant and hoped this one would survive. Then my phone exploded. Missed calls, voicemails, messages stacked so fast they blurred together. Fear crept through the words where confidence used to be. They wanted to talk, to explain. To fix this as a family, I set the phone face down and finished my work. 6 months ago, they decided my silence meant weakness. Now it meant something else entirely. Control had shifted, not with a scream, but with patience, and that terrified them far more than anger ever could. The first real contact came from my brother. I was leaving my apartment one morning, with my laptop bag slung over my shoulder when he stepped out of a black pickup parked across the street, his face tight and eyes avoiding mine. He said, voice low, almost pleading, "We need to talk. Just call me." I didn't move. The street was quiet except for a distant siren, the way the city always sounds like it's alive somewhere else. "This isn't a negotiation," I said evenly. "Call your lawyer." He ran a hand through his hair, exhaling sharply. "It's not like that. Mom, she's freaking out. We need to figure something out before things get worse." My instinct wanted to cave. The version of me that used to tremble in the basement wanted to apologize. Smooth everything over, make my family feel safe again. But I stopped myself. I remembered the folder of records, the copies of contracts, the rental statements, the notes from Ms. Alvarez. I remembered the contract my mother had tried to manipulate, and the email that had never reached my hands. I wasn't afraid anymore. I wasn't desperate. I pulled out my phone, hit the record button, and said, "I don't negotiate about what's mine. I'm listening, but every word counts." His shoulders slumped. The tension was visible in the way he leaned against the truck, jaw tight, voice quieter than before. "We can make this easy," he said, almost under his breath. "Sign a paper saying you don't want your share of the shop or the rental, and this all goes away. Mom, everyone gets to keep things. No lawyers, no court." I held my gaze. "You want it to go away. I want accountability. That's the difference between us." He flinched like I had slapped him. Then he muttered something under his breath, got in the truck, and drove off. Later that night, I sent the recording to Ms. Alvarez. Her reply was one sentence. "Perfect. This will help." For the first time, I saw the shape of the power shift. They had always treated me as powerless, as the child in the basement who could be yelled at, humiliated, and ignored. Now they were the ones scrambling, caught between their lies and the law, trying to rewrite a story they no longer controlled. I didn't feel satisfaction yet. Not really. I felt clarity. And clarity, I realized, was stronger than rage, sharper than revenge, and quieter than fear. This was no longer about proving them wrong to strangers online. It was about reclaiming what had been mine all along and making sure the world, the law, and my family finally recognized it. By the time the letters reached my mother and sister, the storm had only just begun. At first, nothing happened. I kept working, refining designs, paying bills, living in a quiet apartment that finally felt like mine. Then the phone started buzzing. Group chat notifications, texts from my mom, voicemails from Ryan, messages from Lisa begging me to just talk it out like a family, screenshots of the letters circulated online, and almost immediately, a familiar pattern emerged. Strangers taking sides based on incomplete information. Comments poured in under my sister's posts, some calling me greedy, some speculating about the family drama, but I didn't respond. I let them talk. I didn't have to. The law had my back, and for the first time in my life, that was more important than the narrative they wanted the world to believe. My attorney, Ms. Alvarez, had anticipated this. "They'll try to gaslight you, to make you feel guilty," she said. "Ignore it. This isn't about public opinion. It's about consequences." And sure enough, they did. My mother posted vague, tearful stories about hardship, about how she'd raised her kids alone and always sacrificed, never mentioning that I had been excluded from my rightful inheritance. My sister crafted a short, dramatic clip about betrayal and loyalty, carefully framing me as someone choosing money over blood. Ryan tried to call repeatedly, leaving increasingly desperate messages. At first, part of me wanted to pick up, to calm them, to explain, but then I remembered every late night in that basement, every lecture about electricity bills, every sarcastic comment about freelancing not being a real job. I remembered the trash bags I remembered the live stream. I remembered that for years. My family had been treating me as an invisible obstacle rather than a human being with rights. So I didn't answer. I didn't engage. I let Miss Alvarez handle the communications, sending polite but firm responses to ensure nothing could be spun against me legally. It was strange how quiet it felt. Almost boring to simply wait while they clawed at control, and the law quietly stripped it from their hands. Every new post, every online protest, every frantic voicemail was evidence of desperation. Desperation they had cultivated in me for years but could no longer manipulate. And as I continued working on client projects, submitting invoices, and sipping coffee in my sunny apartment, I realized something profound. Revenge wasn't yelling, wasn't viral clips, wasn't humiliation. Revenge was patience, strategy, and letting the system they'd ignored for years deliver the consequences they had earned. The mediation day arrived like a storm contained in a fluorescent-lit conference room. I walked in with Miss Alvarez at my side, folder of records under my arm, and a calm I had spent months cultivating. Across the table sat my mother, face tight with nerves, hands gripping a tissue like it could anchor her. Ryan slouched in his chair, jaw tense, and Lisa fiddling with her phone as if scrolling through followers. Reactions could armor her against reality. Their lawyer, a gray-haired man with tired eyes, started with the usual lines about family, compromise, and keeping matters private. But Miss Alvarez didn't flinch. She laid out every fact, every discrepancy, every document showing withheld rental income, loans taken without consent, and the clause in my grandfather's will about concealed ownership. My family stories about sacrifice and hardship collapsed quietly under the weight of paper and precedent when my mother tried to argue that she had just managed the finances for the family. Ms. Alvarez calmly reminded her that managing without disclosure doesn't erase ownership. When Ryan muttered something about ruining everything Grandpa built, I met his gaze and said evenly, "You didn't ruin anything. You just pretended my rights didn't exist." Lisa tried to interject, framing herself as a victim, but every time she spoke, the lawyer on her side had to pause and consult the documents, which undermined her narrative with cold, objective facts. Hours passed. They tried to haggle on reimbursements, on management of the properties, on the apology statements I had requested. Each time, Ms. Alvarez brought them back to the clause that could cost them 15% of ownership per year. Concealment continued. The realization hit them visibly. Every attempt to manipulate me now risked real, measurable loss. By the end of the session, exhaustion and fear had replaced indignation. They signed, slowly, reluctantly. The agreement ensured I received my rightful share of future rental income, reimbursement of withheld funds, and a professional management company to oversee the properties, plus a statement acknowledging the truth publicly. My mother's apology, once performative, was now official. Ryan and Lisa were forced to reckon with the evidence that contradicted years of narrative control. I didn't cheer. I didn't gloat. I simply exhaled, feeling the weight in my chest finally shift to something light. For the first time, my family couldn't rewrite my story or gaslight reality. They could post videos, write posts, and call me names online. But the truth had paper, signatures, and law behind it, and, for the first time, I was untouchable. In the months after the agreement, my life settled into a rhythm that felt almost ordinary. But in the quiet, I understood how extraordinary it really was. I woke up to sunlight spilling across my apartment instead of the dim basement bulbs. My desk was steady, my computer organized, my work paid me directly, and no one told me I was a burden. The rental income checks arrived on schedule. The management company handled the properties professionally, and for the first time, I felt fully untethered from the weight of other people's expectations. My family still existed in the background of my life. My mother sent them occasional tentative message. Ryan asked practical questions about the shop's closure. and Lisa posted sporadic updates on social media, but I no longer had to respond. Silence became a tool, not a punishment. The satisfaction wasn't in their embarrassment, their lost brand deals, or the way the bank froze the line of credit. It was in the fact that their control over me had evaporated. I built my world quietly, deliberately, one project at a time, and the chest-tightening anxiety that had accompanied my name for years was gone. I wasn't chasing revenge. I was living. I spent mornings making coffee, evenings designing campaigns for clients who trusted me, and weekends exploring neighborhoods, parks, and coffee shops that felt like freedom. I kept the old voicemail from my grandfather saved in my phone, listening to his voice when I needed it. Reminder that someone had believed in me before anyone else did. And sometimes, when I catch a glimpse of myself in the mirror, I see a woman who knows her worth not because anyone told her, but because she claimed it, quietly and unapologetically. My family's choices left consequences in their wake, but those consequences never touched me again. I am not a parasite. I am Beatrice. I have a story that is mine, shaped by truth, patience, and perseverance. And for the first time, I understand that the most powerful revenge isn't humiliation or chaos. It's reclaiming your life, your voice, and your future, and letting those who underestimated you watch from a distance as you thrive.